You think you've made some bad decisions? Maybe left the oven on, or texted your ex? Cute. But have you ever, say, ordered the sea to be whipped? Or tried to make your horse a politician? No? Then you're already doing better than some of history's most powerful rulers. Today, we're not just opening history books. We're rummaging through the royal blooper reel. 33 times kings and queens proved that a crown doesn't come with a brain. Get ready for sheer, unadulterated royal stupidity, and don't forget to subscribe. 1. Think your workplace has some wild management decisions? Well, let me whisk you away to ancient Rome, where Emperor Caligula redefined executive overreach. This wasn't just a case of a bad hire. Caligula, who genuinely considered himself a living god, a belief that absolute power tends to encourage, decided his favorite horse, Incitatus, was prime political material. Not just a stable buddy, mind you, but a future consul of Rome. Incitatus enjoyed a marble stable, an ivory manger, jewel-studded collars, and even hosted lavish dinner parties. Senators, quaking in their sandals, would attend these equine soirees. The potential fallout of this bizarre notion wasn't just mockery. It was a stark demonstration of Caligula's contempt for the Senate and Roman tradition, further destabilizing an already tense political climate and contributing to the hatred that ultimately led to his assassination. So, next time your boss promotes a pet project, just be glad it doesn't involve hay. 2. Ever been so furious at a force of nature that you wished you could physically punish it? King Xerxes, Eoward of Persia, took this impulse to a truly imperial and utterly baffling extreme. After a violent storm obliterated his meticulously engineered pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, crucial for his grand invasion of Greece, Xerxes didn't just order a rebuild. No, he ordered the sea itself to receive 300 lashes, have fetters thrown into its depths, and be branded with hot irons, all while his heralds recited a stern lecture to the unruly waters. While this provided a temporary outlet for Xerxes' rage, it did little to intimidate the Aegean and likely eroded the morale of his soldiers, who were probably questioning their leader's grip on reality. This act of supreme arrogance also became a symbol of Persian hubris for Greek propagandists, fueling their resistance. It's a classic case of mistaking brute force for actual control, and a hilariously dumb way to deal with a weather report. 3. Let's delicately step into the 14th century French court of King Charles VI, later known as Charles the Mad, whose reign was marked by periods of severe mental illness that had profound consequences for his kingdom. During one terrifying delusion, Charles became utterly convinced he was made of glass. Not metaphorically fragile, but literally, physically glass. He reportedly had iron rods sewn into his clothing to prevent shattering, and lived in constant fear of being touched. These episodes incapacitated him for long stretches, creating a power vacuum that exacerbated the already fierce rivalries among French nobles and royal family members. This internal strife significantly weakened France during a critical phase of the Hundred Years' War with England, contributing to devastating defeats and prolonged instability. So, while the image of a glass king is darkly comic, the reality of his condition was a tragic and politically disastrous, dumb situation for France. 4. Now, for a tale of truly questionable royal priorities from the Ottoman Empire, meet Sultan Ibrahim the Cerse. While his empire faced its share of 17th century challenges, Ibrahim, often called Ibrahim the Mad, embarked on a rather peculiar imperial quest to find and honor the fattest woman in the empire. Agents were dispatched not to gather intelligence or manage provinces, but to locate a lady of truly epic proportions. The chosen one, an Armenian woman nicknamed Shekar, Sugar Cube, was showered with riches and titles, allegedly even made a governor. This bizarre fixation, alongside his generally erratic and decadent behavior, drained the treasury and eroded confidence in his rule. It culminated in his deposition and execution, a stark reminder that when a ruler's personal whims completely overshadow state affairs, the consequences can be anything but sweet. It's a dumb decision that highlights a reign teetering on the edge of absurdity and incompetence. 5. If you find modern city planning frustrating, imagine living in St. Petersburg under Zar Paler of Russia. This late 18th century autocrat wasn't just a stickler for order. He was a maestro of mind-bogglingly arbitrary decrees. Beyond his infamous bans on round hats, certain French words, and specific styles of dance, Paul reportedly issued an edict that all carriages in the capital could only drive straight ahead. No turns. Need to go left? You'd better find a route that circles the globe or just abandon your journey. The supposed logic was that turning indicated indecision or, even worse, revolutionary sympathies. While perhaps an exaggeration of his already eccentric micromanagement, such tales reflected the stifling and unpredictable atmosphere of his reign, which bred resentment among the nobility and military. This kind of obsessive, impractical rulemaking ultimately contributed to the conspiracy that ended his reign and his life with a rather sharp turn of events. 6. Let's venture to 16th century Sweden and the turbulent reign of King Erik XIII, a monarch whose intelligence was often overshadowed by his severe paranoia and volatile temper, leading to some truly dumb and destructive decisions. His obsessive fear of conspiracies, particularly from the influential Stewart family, escalated into a horrifying episode known as the Stewart Murders. In a fit of rage and delusion, Erik not only ordered but reportedly participated in the killing of several Stewart noblemen. The aftermath saw the king, consumed by remorse or further madness, fleeing into the forests disguised as a peasant. This act of shocking brutality and the king's subsequent breakdown threw the kingdom into chaos, undermined royal authority, and was a key factor in his eventual deposition by his own brothers. It's a chilling example of how a king's personal demons can become a nation's political nightmare. 7. Pop quiz. What's the most outrageously decadent and frankly dumb way an ancient Egyptian pharaoh dealt with a common household pest? If you guessed human flypaper, congratulations, you're on Pepi II's wavelength. This long-reigning pharaoh of the Old Kingdom apparently had such an aversion to flies that he commanded naked slaves to be smeared with honey and stationed nearby. The idea was that the flies, irresistibly drawn to the sweet, sticky servants, would leave His Majesty undisturbed. While this speaks volumes about the absolute power and extreme luxury afforded to pharaohs, it's also a hilariously impractical and inhumane solution. It's hard to say if it effectively reduced the fly population around Pepi, but it certainly cemented his legacy with one of history's weirdest and most questionable uses of royal prerogative. A truly sticky situation that highlights the often absurd lengths rulers would go to for personal comfort, regardless of the dignity of others. 8. And now for a lesson in how to alienate your entire military and court with a single, spectacularly ill-judged act of fanboyism. Enter Zar Peter III of Russia. Ascending the throne in 1762, with Russia on the verge of a decisive victory over Prussia in the 7 Years' War, Peter did the unthinkable. An ardent admirer of Prussia's King Frederick the Great, Peter immediately halted all Russian military operations against his hero, returned all conquered territories without demanding any concessions, and even offered Frederick a military alliance. He then proceeded to redress his army in Prussian-style uniforms. The Russian military, who had sacrificed immensely to defeat the Prussians, were beyond furious. This abrupt and inexplicable reversal of foreign policy, driven purely by personal admiration, was seen as a betrayal and a profound national humiliation. It was a politically suicidal, dumb move that directly led to his overthrow and assassination just 6 months into his reign, orchestrated by his own wife, Catherine the Great. Talk about a fatal attraction. 9. So, you think your family throws over-the-top parties? Empress Anna Ioannovna of Russia in the 1730s would like a word. For the forced wedding of her court jester, Prince Golitsyn, to an elderly Kalmyk serving woman, because, why not? Anna commissioned something truly special, an entire palace meticulously carved from solid ice. We're talking ice furniture, ice decorations, even ice cannons that actually fired. The unhappy couple was then displayed inside, practically freezing, for the court's amusement. This elaborate, cruel joke cost an absolute fortune, cementing Anna's reputation as not just extravagant, but shockingly callous. And, of course, come spring, this monument to royal spite simply melted away, a fleeting testament to how some rulers found dumb and expensive ways to be entertained at others' expense, leaving behind little but a chilling legacy. 10. So, Louis XVI of France. Nice guy, probably. Terrible at being king during a revolution. One of his big brain moves? Giving a ton of money and support to the American colonists fighting to break free from their king, George III of Britain. On one hand, it stuck it to the Brits, France's longtime rival. Smart, right? Well, not so much when your own people are starting to get ideas about liberty, equality, and maybe not having a king at all. The American Revolution basically gave French revolutionaries a how-to guide, and guess who ended up being the star of their own, much bloodier sequel featuring Madame Guillotine? Yep, Louis himself. Helping others overthrow a monarch when your own throne is shaky? Dumb move, Louis. Real dumb. 11. Let's talk about Henry VIII of England, the king who basically invented royal drama. He desperately wanted a son, but his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, only gave him a daughter. So Henry wants a divorce, or an annulment, technically. The Pope says no. Most kings would grumble, maybe try some diplomacy. Henry? He just says, fine, I'll start my own church. And he did. The Church of England. Also, he could ditch Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn, who also gave him a daughter and then lost her head. He went through 6 wives in total. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. It's like a really grim nursery rhyme. Breaking with centuries of religious tradition and plunging your country into religious turmoil just for a new wife and an heir. That's a level of my way or the highway that's both bold and colossally dumb. 12. Ah, Mary, Queen of Scots. A life so dramatic, Netflix would greenlight it in a heartbeat. One of her most questionable decisions, and that's putting it mildly, was marrying James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. Now, Bothwell wasn't just any nobleman. He was the guy everyone and their dog suspected of having just blown up Mary's previous husband, Lord Darnley. Like, literally, with gunpowder. So, marrying the prime suspect in your husband's murder? Not exactly a PR win. It made her look either complicit or incredibly naive and easily manipulated. Either way, it horrified the Scottish nobles, turned public opinion against her, and was a major factor in her eventually losing her throne and, later, her head. Love might be blind, Mary, but your political advisors sure weren't. Dumb, dumb, dumb. 13. Next up, Roman Emperor Commodus. If you thought your CEO was a narcissist, wait till you hear about this guy. Son of the wise Marcus Aurelius, Commodus was different. He fancied himself a real-life Hercules. So, what does an emperor who thinks he's a demigod do? He fights as a gladiator in the Colosseum. Of course, his opponents were usually terrified, poorly armed or already wounded, so he always won. Shocking. He'd also charge the Roman treasury an insane amount of money for each appearance. He even renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana and declared himself a new Romulus. This wasn't just eccentric. It was a massive insult to Roman dignity and tradition, and it made a lot of powerful people very, very angry. Unsurprisingly, his reign ended with assassination. Playing dress-up is fine, but when you're the emperor, maybe stick to running the empire instead of showboating. Dumb. 14. Ever wished you could just delegate your entire job while you pursued other interests? Well, Mughal Emperor Jawengeir in 17th century India pretty much did just that. His other interests increasingly involved copious amounts of wine and opium, leaving him, shall we say, frequently indisposed for the tedious tasks of ruling a subcontinent. Luckily for the empire, and him, his incredibly capable wife, Nur Jahan, along with her family, stepped in and effectively ran the show. While it's a quirky historical footnote that things didn't immediately collapse, relying on your spouse to govern while you're on a permanent, spiritual retreat fueled by intoxicants is a monumentally dumb approach to emperorship. It showcased a profound dereliction of duty, turning the mighty Mughal ruler into little more than a figurehead in his own high court. 15. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, also known as the Fairy Tale King, or Mad King Ludwig. This guy loved castles. Not just any castles, think Disney on steroids. He poured insane amounts of money, both his own and state funds, into building fantastical, over-the-top palaces like Neuschwanstein, often in remote mountain locations. While they're now major tourist attractions, back then, his ministers were tearing their hair out. The kingdom was teetering on bankruptcy, but Ludwig was more interested in overseeing the construction of his fantasy worlds, where he'd often live as a recluse, sometimes staging private Wagner opera performances for an audience of one, himself. His government eventually had him declared mentally unfit to rule. Spending your country into the poorhouse for your architectural daydreams? Beautiful, yes? Smart? Not so much. Definitely a dumb way to manage a budget. 16. The classic blunder. Invading Russia in winter. King Charles V of Sweden was one of the first to make this rookie mistake on a grand scale in the early 1700s. He was a brilliant military commander, but he seriously underestimated the Russian winter and the vastness of the territory. His army got bogged down, frozen, starved, and eventually smashed at the Battle of Poltava. It was a catastrophic defeat that marked the beginning of the end for Sweden as a major European power. You'd think later leaders would learn. Nope. Napoleon tried it. Hitler tried it. Same result. Failure and frostbite. It's like there's a giant historical signpost saying, "Do not invade Russia in winter," and these guys just whistled past it. Dumb and very, very cold. 17. Roman Emperor Nero. His name is pretty much synonymous with bad emperor. The most famous story? That he fiddled while Rome burned during the Great Fire of 64 AD. While he probably played a lyre, not a fiddle, and historians debate whether he actually started the fire, he probably didn't. His reaction was not great. He used a huge cleared area in the devastated city to build himself an enormous, opulent palace called the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. So, while your citizens are homeless and grieving, you build yourself a mega mansion? Terrible PR, Nero. He also blamed the Christians for the fire, leading to horrific persecutions. Whether it was malice or just colossal incompetence and insensitivity, his actions during and after the fire solidified his reputation as one of Rome's dumbest and cruelest rulers. 18. Let's talk about King Edward II of England, a man whose poor choice in special friends led to absolute chaos. Edward wasn't a bad guy at heart, maybe, but he was terrible at picking favorites. He showered his male companions, first Piers Gaveston and then Hugh Despenser, with titles, land, and power, completely infuriating the established nobility. These weren't just friendships, they were relationships that totally dominated the king and skewed royal policy. The barons rose up in rebellion multiple times. Gaveston was executed. Eventually, Edward himself was deposed by his own wife, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, and then likely met a famously gruesome end involving a red-hot poker. Prioritizing your unqualified buddies over the stability of your kingdom and the advice of your nobles? A recipe for disaster and a spectacularly dumb way to rule. 19. Queen Mary I of England, or Bloody Mary, as she's more famously known. She was a devout Catholic, and when she came to the throne after her Protestant half-brother, she was determined to bring England back to the true faith. Her method? Burning nearly 300 Protestants at the stake. Ouch. But here's the extra layer of dumb. Mary twice believed she was pregnant. These phantom pregnancies were a big deal. An heir would secure the Catholic succession. She saw them as divine validation for her fiery policies. When no baby appeared, it was a massive personal and political blow, relying on imaginary pregnancies to justify brutal religious persecution, which only further alienated a huge chunk of your population. That's not just cruel, it's also a profoundly misguided and ultimately self-defeating, and therefore dumb, way to govern. 20. King Farouk I of Egypt. This guy reigned in the mid-20th century and was less of a serious monarch and more of a character. He was famously a kleptomaniac. We're talking about swiping things from his guests, even reportedly pinching Winston Churchill's pocket watch during a state dinner. Imagine the awkwardness. Beyond his sticky fingers, Farouk was known for his lavish lifestyle, his massive appetite. He once ate 600 oysters in a single sitting, allegedly. and his general detachment from the realities of his country, which was facing huge social and political problems. He was eventually overthrown in a military coup. Being more interested in collecting shiny objects, whether you paid for them or not, than in leading your nation. That's a pretty dumb look for a king. 21. If you ever feel out of place at a fancy party, spare a thought for the royal courts hosting King Ferdinand of Naples. This 18th–19th century monarch wasn't exactly known for his regal bearing or intellectual prowess. In fact, Ferdinand, often called Il Re Lazzarone, the beggar king, reportedly loved nothing more than ditching the palace, dressing down as a common fisherman or street vendor, and then heading to the local markets to sell his goods, often gleefully cheating his customers for sport. While his subjects might have found it amusing, fellow European monarchs were less impressed, viewing him as an uncultured buffoon and an embarrassment. Choosing to play market hustler instead of attending to pressing state affairs? That's not just eccentric. It's a hilariously dumb way to undermine your own authority and international standing, one rotten fish at a time. 22. Let's pop over to 16th century France and King Henry III. This king had a passion, a very fluffy, very small passion. He was utterly obsessed with his little lapdogs, mainly bichons. He didn't just like them, he reportedly carried them around in a fancy basket suspended from his neck, even during important state meetings. Imagine trying to discuss tax policy or military strategy while the king is cooing at a yappy furball peeking out of his man purse. He apparently let them run all over the dinner table during banquets too. While loving your pets is great, letting your canine obsession completely overshadow your royal duties and make you look ridiculous to your court and foreign dignitaries. That's a special kind of dumb. Dog first, state later indeed. 23. Sultan Murad IV of the Ottoman Empire. This 17th century ruler was a man of contradictions, especially when it came to vices. He famously imposed strict prohibitions on coffee, tobacco, and alcohol, with punishments up to and including death for those caught indulging. He'd even roam the streets of Istanbul in disguise, looking for offenders. Sounds like a real hardliner, right? Well, plot twist. Murad himself was reportedly a notorious drunkard who often partook in the very things he banned for others. Rules for thee, but not for me, is a classic move for hypocritical leaders. But when you're executing people for drinking coffee while you're secretly knocking back wine, that's a level of double-standard dumbness that's hard to top. 24. Sultan Süleyman II of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, this one might be a bit of a legend, but it perfectly illustrates a certain kind of royal disconnect. The story goes that during a particularly harsh winter in the late 17th century, while ordinary people were freezing, Süleyman II was so concerned about the well-being of his prized horses that he ordered their stables to be heated with silver braziers burning expensive incense. Horses living in more luxury than a good chunk of the human population? If true, it's the kind of tone-deaf, out-of-touch decision that screams, "I have no idea what's actually going on," or "I simply don't care." Prioritizing your pony's comfort over your people's survival with such extravagant means? Dumb, and a PR nightmare waiting to happen. 25. Roman Emperor Vitellius. His reign during the chaotic Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD, was short. But oh boy, was it memorable for one thing? His absolutely legendary gluttony. While Rome was tearing itself apart with civil war, Vitellius was apparently most concerned with his next meal. And these weren't just big dinners, they were insanely extravagant, non-stop banquets, featuring the rarest and most expensive delicacies sourced from across the empire. We're talking thousands of birds, cartloads of seafood, you name it. He supposedly spent a fortune on food in just a few months. Leading a nation requires focus, especially during a crisis. Spending your brief time on the throne primarily dedicated to competitive eating while the empire burns. That's a spectacularly dumb way to prioritize. 26. Back to Persia with Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great. This guy clearly didn't inherit all of his father's good sense. His invasion of Kush, ancient Nubia, Sudan, was an unmitigated disaster, largely because he marched his massive army into the brutal desert with woefully inadequate supplies. What happens when an army runs out of food in the middle of nowhere? Bad things. Really bad things. Reports, even if exaggerated by later Greek historians, suggest his soldiers resorted to drawing lots to eat each other. Cannibalism. His campaign collapsed, the army was decimated, and Cambyses returned in disgrace. Launching a major military expedition without a basic grasp of logistics, like, food and water, that's not just bad planning, that's catastrophically, historically dumb. 27. Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, ruling around the turn of the 17th century. While Europe was a tinderbox of religious and political tensions, 30 years war brewing, Rudolph was often more interested in his hobbies. He was a massive patron of the arts and sciences, which is great, but he was obsessed with alchemy, astrology, and collecting occult objects and curiosities, like alleged unicorn horns. His Prague court was a magnet for mystics, alchemists, and charlatans. Meanwhile, the actual business of running the vast and fractious Holy Roman Empire often got neglected. His political inaction and detachment contributed to the escalating crises around him. Prioritizing the quest for the Philosopher's Stone over preventing a continental war? Majestically dumb. 28. Roman Emperor Elagabalus. If Caligula was a weirdo, Elagabalus was like Caligula on a psychedelic bender. This teenage emperor, who came to power in 218 AD, was a priest of the Syrian sun god Elagabal, and he tried to make this god the chief deity of Rome, which did not go down well. He married a Vestal virgin, a huge no-no, reportedly offered to have himself castrated if anyone would do it, appointed his barber and chariot driver to high office, and was notorious for his scandalous sexual behavior and cross-dressing. He supposedly even set up a brothel in the imperial palace. His reign was a short, chaotic, and utterly bizarre spectacle that alienated everyone: the Senate, the army, the people. It ended predictably with his assassination. Being an emperor is a serious job. Treating it like a non-stop sacrilegious frat party? Dumb beyond belief. 29. Let's talk about King George III of Great Britain, the monarch who famously lost America. Now, George wasn't inherently a dumb person in the simple sense. He was actually quite cultured. But his stubbornness, his black and white view of the colonial dispute, and his unwavering support for hardline ministers who advocated coercion over conciliation were, from the perspective of preserving his American colonies, profoundly dumb. He and his government consistently misjudged the mood in America, dismissed legitimate grievances as insubordination, and opted for military solutions when diplomacy might have worked. The series of policies, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, Intolerable Acts, just fanned the flames of rebellion, refusing to compromise or understand the colonists' perspective, leading directly to the loss of a massive chunk of your empire. That's a royal screw-up of historic proportions. 30. Imagine trying to run a country when the head of state is, to put it delicately, not always all there. That was the predicament of 18th century Denmark under King Christian VII. Suffering from severe mental illness, Christian's behavior was wildly unpredictable, from public indecency and fits of violence to hours spent banging his head against walls or obsessively playing with dolls. This effectively created a power vacuum. For a time, his German physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee, stepped in, not only treating the king but also seducing the queen and implementing sweeping radical reforms. This bizarre ménage à trois of power, medicine, and romance at the top made Denmark a subject of international gossip and concern, showcasing a profoundly dysfunctional and dumb situation for a nation. Though Struensee's reforms were progressive, his eventual downfall and execution, with Christian remaining a figurehead, highlighted the dangers of a crown resting on such an unstable head. 31. Let's head to Ming Dynasty China and meet the Zhengde Emperor. This early 16th century ruler found the day-to-day business of governing a bit of a bore. So, he invented an alter ego for himself, a military commander named Zhu Shu. He would then issue imperial orders to General Zhu Shu, and then, as Zhu Shu, he'd lead military expeditions, often pointless ones that he himself instigated for fun, and report back to himself as the emperor. He loved the thrill of being on campaign, so much that he'd frequently abandon the forbidden city for long periods, leaving eunuchs and corrupt officials to run amok. Treating the governance of a massive empire like a live-action role-playing game where you're the main character and your own NPC sidekick? Ingeniously creative, perhaps, but from a ruling perspective, utterly dumb. 32. Empress Dowager Cixi of China. Late 19th century. China is facing immense pressure from foreign powers and desperately needs to modernize, especially its military. So, where does a significant chunk of the naval budget go? To renovate and expand the summer palace for Cixi's lavish 60th birthday celebrations. The most infamous part? Funds meant for warships were allegedly used to build a massive ornate marble boat. That, of course, couldn't actually sail. It just sat there in the lake. While the exact accounting is debated by historians, the symbolism is undeniable. Prioritizing a fancy, useless party barge over a functional navy when your country's sovereignty is at stake? That's a level of short-sighted, decadent dumbness that's truly breathtaking. 33. And finally, let's visit the crumbling Western Roman Empire with Emperor Honorius. The story goes that in 410 AD, when a messenger arrived breathlessly at Ravenna, where the imperial court had relocated, to announce, "Rome has perished," referring to Alaric the Visigoth's sack of the city, Honorius burst into tears. Not for the city, the empire, or its people. No, he thought the messenger was talking about his favorite pet chicken, also named Roma. Upon being reassured that his chicken was fine, he was supposedly greatly relieved. Whether this anecdote is literally true or a later embellishment, it perfectly captures the image of an emperor so detached, so insulated, and so utterly clueless about the cataclysmic events engulfing his empire that his primary concern was poultry. As your capital city burns, worrying about your feathered friend? The ultimate dumb ruler moment. So, that was a wild ride through royal ridiculousness. From horse politicians to glass kings, common sense clearly wasn't always crowned. But if these are the blunders we know, imagine the truly idiotic decrees lost to time. Here's a kicker. Which modern president, if suddenly granted absolute monarchical power, do you think would make the unleash your genius in the comments? Enjoyed this? Smash that like button and subscribe for more historical WT free. You won't regret it.